Hello. This Memorial Day weekend, I'd like to take a few moments to share a very special revolver I own with my viewers. I've had this gun for about 25 years. It's fast approaching the 100-year mark of its production. And what it is a Smith & Wesson 1917 military revolver in .45 ACP. This gun was originally produced in 1917 as a first-year production. And these revolvers and a similar model made by Colt and based on the news service were made to supplement the 1911s that were becoming available for World War I. There simply wasn't enough 1911s in the system to go around, so they asked the two companies to offset that with some revolver production. They gladly agreed, and this and the Colt were the end result. As far as I know, this revolver was used in World War I. It was then put back into storage at the end of the war. At that time, a lot of the Colt revolvers were issued or released to federal agencies. Places like the Border Patrol, United States Postal Service, some others, FBI got some. Mainly Colts. The Smith & Wessons ended up in reserve and were held in reserve. Most of the Colts disappeared. I'll try to get into that here in a bit as to why. But I want to share this revolver because it's a survivor. It went through that World War I period. Then it was reissued again in World War II. The person that had this gun before I did was an Army veteran, member of the Tank Corps, European Theater. He was assigned to Patton's Division. So he saw a lot of service. Went through a lot of hardship, I'm sure. Managed to survive all that. That's a rather major accomplishment for a tanker. At the time in the European theater, the mortality rate for tankers was right up there with the mortality rate for United States air crews. So death was a pretty common occurrence for these guys. To actually get out of it alive and in one piece, that was doing something. When he finished up, he decided he liked this revolver so well he was going to bring it home with him, and that's what he did. He smuggled it home. I don't blame him, and I'm not going to judge him. I'm glad he did, because now I have possession of it. But he got home, used the gun for a while. At some point, he decided, he was done getting too old, whatever, and decided to store the revolver. He ended up greasing it up real well, greased the chambers, greased the bore, greased the outside of the gun really, really well. Put a rag that was grease soaked over the barrel, put the whole thing back in the original holster, and then put it in the attic for storage. I have that original holster. It came with the revolver when it was gifted to me. It's in very, very poor shape. It saw a lot of hard service while the guy was in the Army. I don't know if he used it once he got back out or not, but it's seen a lot of service, a lot of use. It's very well worn. I had to do restitch areas of it. Put a tab back on here for the pull the dot. Get that back in there. So it's not really a usable holster anymore, but it's a nice little piece to have, a little piece of history. So I decided to keep it. Anyway, this gun was stored up into an attic in this holster for probably close to 40 years. And in that period, it was neglected. It wasn't checked on or anything. The holster ended up getting wet. The gun ended up getting wet. And the guy passed away. The soldier passed away in 1987. The gun was willed over to his son. His son didn't really have much interest in firearms. Wasn't a shooter. Wasn't terribly interested in owning a firearm, as a matter of fact. But he knew that I liked firearms, so he asked me if I might be interested in having this gun, and I told him yes, of course I would. And he gave it to me. And it was a thoughtful gesture on his part. And when I received the gun, it was in very, very poor shape. That water damage that it suffered while up there in the attic froze the gun up. The action couldn't be moved at all. Cylinder couldn't be opened. The gun was frozen solid. And it took me about a week of soaking it in a can of kerosene just to get it to where I could start opening it up and start working on it. I had to force the screws out of the receiver in order to get the side plate off. The insides were completely rusted. You can see some of that pitting as I've left on the hammer and on the trigger, other than polishing the rust off of it. All the springs inside were corroded, so I had to replace all the springs. All the internal parts needed to be polished. Everything needed to be cleaned up. Surprisingly, the barrel on this gun remains in excellent condition. This is the original finish on the barrel. The bore remains in excellent condition. I guess it has to do with that grease-soaked rag being wrapped around it. The rag wasn't up here on this part of the gun, so it incurred the vast majority of the damage that happened. And some of the real problems that I saw on the gun, there was some major pitting that occurred here in this particular cylinder wall right here. The top strap was rusted and pitted very heavily, so I had to clean these surfaces off, and I had to take a nickel weld rod and fill in those pits. Polish all the external finish was gone, of course. Basically this gun was orange with rust. All the screws had to be replaced. I had to replace the thumb latch. It was quite corroded in the back. The original grips that were on this gun, this is, like I said, a first year production. These are identified because they have a Gilbert H. Stewart cartouche up here in lieu of the Flaming Ordnance, which is a much more common mark for the gun. And that indicates that's a first year production. The first about 6 months of the production, Gilbert H. Stewart was inspecting these guns. After that, it went to standard ordnance inspectors, and they just hit it with the Flaming Ordnance bomb. Had the dish grips too, the early style Magna grips, or the early style standard grips that were dished out up here at the frame cutout. Later versions had that area filled in. They were rotten, and I had to replace. They just fell apart. It crumbled apart. So I had to replace them. I ended up building a set of Magna type grips for it, finishing these out, installing it. They fit quite nice. They look quite nice. I actually like them better than the original real skimpy grips. But in all honesty, when I go out and shoot this gun, I made another set in the full Magnum version. And these are the type that I use when I'm actually shooting the gun. These are much more comfortable to shoot, and it's a lot less punishing on the hand. So this is the set of grips I use while I'm shooting it. Again, as I said, the chambers and the bore on this revolver are excellent condition, bright and shiny. There's no pitting in it. There was a heavy lob of grease in there when I got this gun, and that saved it, protected it. The guy obviously took care of it while he was in service, and he actually maintained it as well as he could when he got out of service. It's just one of those things where you kind of forget about something, and he'd probably seen enough of guns himself. He spent 40 years of his life after he got out of the Army painting houses. So he may not have been much of a gunman, but he liked this revolver and kept it. I'm glad he did. And one of the things that I want to point out, why was a tanker carrying a revolver in World War II? Well, as I said, this guy was a member of Patton's division. George S. Patton was quite a prolific general at the time. And contrary to a lot of public opinion and what you see in some of the movies that have portrayed Patton, he was not despised by a lot of the guys that were under him. He was adored by them. They did everything in their power to kind of emulate the strong man qualities that Patton was known to display. And everybody at that time, and probably most people today, know that George Patton, was a revolver guy. He was not a real big semi-automatic pistol guy. So because of that, the tankers tried to get revolvers in order to emulate Patton. And a lot of the military policemen that were coming over to the European theater at the time were issued 1917 revolvers. Tankers quickly got wind of this and started trading their .45 automatics for 1911 A1s, 1911s for these 1917 revolvers. And I'm sure the tankers love getting the 1917 revolvers, and I'm sure the MPs love getting those 45 automatics as much as the tankers enjoyed getting the revolvers. So that's probably how this gun was acquired. Carried out throughout the war, as I said. If you've ever seen the movie Fury with Brad Pitt, it's about an M4 Sherman tank crew in the France and Belgian region in the latter part of the war. But you may have noticed that Brad Pitt, who's a tank commander, is carrying a 1917 Smith & Wesson revolver. That's one of the things I do like about that movie, is they tended to be pretty accurate in their portrayal of what was going on and the horrors and some of the equipment that the guys were using at that time. They were pretty darn close to getting it right. And that revolver would have been right in place with a tank commander or even a standard tank driver or gunner at that period of time. So that fit in quite well. And once I got this gun cleaned up, started shooting it, I was lucky enough to get quite a few of the half moon clips. And I do quite a bit of shooting with these. Not as much as I did when I first started shooting it. They've really turned out to be not my favorite way to shoot the gun. A little later on, I managed to get a hold of these full moon clips, and these I like better than those half moon, the original half moon clips, for a lot of reasons. They're made of a little heavier steel. These are pretty flimsy steel, and while it's easy to clip cartridges into these half moons, it's not so easy getting them back out. These clips are fairly thin, and they're fairly easy to bend. And once they're bent, they tend to jam up the revolver. They'll tie up the cylinder when it rotates if they're not pretty well perfectly straight. You don't have that problem with these heavier full moon clips. Big deal with these is trying to get the cartridges off the clips and in. They're not, again, like the half moons, they're not as hard to put the cartridges in, but they're kind of a pain to get them out. I use a California comp tool for getting cartridge cases off of these. Works great, and keeps everything on the straight and narrow with the clip. Really, my favorite way that I've found to shoot these is using the 45 auto rim cartridges. These were originally developed in 1919 or 1920, right after these guns started being released onto the federal market, and then eventually the civilian market. And I think the big reason that these came about is most of the guns that come out of the military and were released onto the civilian market were the Colts. The Smiths were held in reserve, and I think the big reason for that is the Smiths were all made with a step in the cylinder, so you could load individual 45 ACP cartridges into the cylinder and get them to function and fire. Of course, you'd have to manually poke them out. The extractor wouldn't pick them up without the clip on it. The Colts, a lot of the Colts were made with straight bored through cylinder, so they had to use a clip, and if you didn't have that clip and you tried to drop a 45 automatic down in there, it just right through the cylinder. So I think they were probably having trouble getting clips. There weren't any being produced. Whatever the reason, Remington UMC decided to make a cartridge with a rim on it, known as a 45 auto rim. These became very, very popular with law enforcement officials that were issued the guns. Pretty much became the standard round of the era for the gun. Actually, they didn't use these half moon clips too much that I've been able to find out. I don't know why, because they actually offer, some quick reloading and stuff, but maybe they weren't hand loading stuff. I don't know. Whatever reason, these became popular. And I found that they're quite a useful little cartridge for the revolver. They're a little nicer to use than the 45 automatic. They're just fun. And doing a lot of shooting with this revolver, I found that these truncated cone flat nose type bullets are also known as cowboy action bullets, I think, some circles. But this actually shoots the best, groups the best in this revolver, and probably most of the other revolvers. For some reasons I may get into in a separate video. because really I want to talk about this gun more than the ammo. I'm just happy to have received it. I'm happy that I was able to get this gun put together and functioning again. It's been in my possession for 25 years. It was in for his possession for about almost 45 years. Again, I'm not really terribly certain what happened or what went on with it prior to that, but it's got a history. It's a survivor. Kind of a testament to the fact that guns, military firearms can be rebuilt no matter how bad a condition they may look to be. If they're not completely broken down, then you can generally rebuild one into a shootable firearm, which makes them a good value. So I want to thank you for watching, and I want to wish everybody a happy Memorial Day.